I think we're live. Maybe. Yep.
I feel like I just woke up.
You feel like you just woke up? Hello there. And delete that comment. Yep. Okay. Looks like we are live. Wait for some people to get in here. 1 people. Cool. All right, we got some people coming in. Welcome, everybody. Hopefully the video is showing. Mine's paused. Okay, looks like we're good. Hey, everybody, welcome. Another live Q&A. It's Wednesday at 1 p.m. CST, so that means it's time for live Q&A. So welcome, everybody. Thank you again for joining us. We should have our other expert with us, Dr. Nick, here shortly. But on my end, with me, my name's Ian. This is Patrick.
Hello.
He's our husbandry manager. So we've got some questions today that we're going to be answering live. And then, of course, we're going to be answering questions that you all may have and answering them live here. So if anybody has any questions regarding keeping their aquarium, whether it be fresh or salt, feel free to put them in the comments and we'll do our best to answer them. Caitlin says it's my favorite people. Hey, Caitlin, welcome back. Hope you're doing well. I think we saw you in the live dive, so welcome back again. Thanks for joining us. And thank you, everybody, for joining us, too. Let's see. We got 13 people in here. Awesome. Well, welcome, everybody. Hope everybody's having a good week. If anybody's joining us new again, this is our live Q&A. We do this every Wednesday at 1 p.m. CST, but I will say we are changing the schedule to every other Wednesday, so this will be the first occurrence in a new schedule that will start as of this week. So we won't have a live Q&A next Wednesday. We're going to be switching them to every other week. So we just updated the the events page on Facebook so that it's every other week. So the next one will actually be on the 24th. So just a heads up, go take a look at our Facebook events page. We have the updated dates there. And then, of course, RSVP, provide your question to us, and we'll throw it into the mix here to get answered. As always, we do have a banner on our homepage where we can take your questions from the website, too. So if you head on over to liveaquaria.com, you click on the banner that's a little bit, you got to scroll down a little bit on the page. We got our products, and then right below that is a banner. I'll put the link in the chat here after the stream. You can click on that banner and then go to the link and you can submit your question. And then what's cool is that all questions submitted through that link on the homepage are automatically entered into a giveaway for a $25 gift certificate. And actually, I know we've said 4, but we actually have 5 we're going to give away today. So big ups to the winners here. We should have Dr. Nick joining us here any minute, but without further ado, I think we'll get started and we'll take the first question from Virginia. So Virginia is one of the lucky winners of the LiveAquaria $25 gift certificates. Again, she submitted her question by entering it via the form on the website. So go to the home page, click on the banner where you can submit an aquarium question like Virginia did, and you can automatically be entered to win. So Virginia, congratulations, and thank you for your question. Virginia's question is, how do you get an anemone attached to rubble rock? Patrick.
That is a great question. A lot of people get anemones, they put them in their tank, and they want them to be front and center. You know, they obviously picked it out because they want to see it. And Dr. Nick here.
Yeah, we'll get him in here.
Yeah, so when you put it in your tank, you know, most people try to put it in a certain spot, you know, to go, if in a perfect world, I'd like it to be right here, but some anemones, especially smaller ones like BTAs, bubble tip anemones, or Condylactis, those smaller anemones, they're very mobile and they will move around the tank.
Hey, Dr. Nick, welcome. Oh, I think we got some, there we go. All right, welcome.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. Keep going,
No
Patrick.
problem.
Yeah, so some of those smaller anemones will move around the tank. And the reason why they're moving around the tank is they're looking for that perfect spot, you know, a place that has the perfect amount of flow. They don't like to be blasted with flow, but at the same time, they don't want to be in a stagnant spot. And also they want to be, you know, lighting wise, they don't want to be in too bright or too dark of light. And also they have their foot. Their foot is the most vulnerable part of themselves, so they need to protect that too. So a lot of those anemones will try to hide that. So bubble tip anemones, generally they're going to find like a hole in a rock or something they can tuck that foot in and then you know, if the lighting and the flow is fine, that's where they're going to be. I mean, trying to restrict that particular type of anemone is going to be probably impossible. I can say when they are wandering around, you want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on your intakes. So your filter and your power heads, they do tend to find those. So if you're going to be, you know, maybe at nighttime or something, you may want to turn the flow down or maybe turn them off until the anemone has settled in. Because usually within the first 24, 48 hours or so, that's probably the most dangerous time for an anemone that has not found a spot. I can say the larger anemones, like the carpet anemones, sea bay anemones, what's another one? Long tentacle anemones, they have a much larger foot, so they actually like to keep that foot in the sand. So what they'll actually do is they'll kind of like dig through the sand and attach to a hard surface beneath them. So usually it's the bottom of the tank. So larger anemones like that, sometimes you can barricade them into like a corner or something using big heavy rocks, but you got to be careful. Sometimes they'll actually go right underneath those rocks and they could cause a rock slide in your tank. So sometimes that works for those bigger anemones, just kind of, you know, making a nice little nest of rocks for them. Because ideally they're just looking for a spot where they can hide their foot. So those are a little bit easier to try to get them in a certain spot in the tank. But bubble tip anemones, condylactis, they're just going to move around the tank. So all I can say is be patient and keep an eye on those intakes, because they'll probably find it at nighttime if you don't take precautionary measures and turn them off or cover them better or whatnot. So.
Awesome. Well, real quick, thank you, Dr. Nick, for joining us. We kind of got started without you. So thank you again for providing your time and your expertise to the live Q&A as you do every week. Welcome. Hope you're having a good day. And yeah, thank you again for joining us. Awesome. All right, we'll get to the next question. Now, this one's for Dr. Nick. This person's, Timothy is another submission on the website. I'm starting a new 65-gallon low light non-CO2 freshwater aquarium, and I have all the equipment, but need to know what kind of plants and fish and how many I should start with. Ooh, that's a good question. Like some schooling fish like neon tetras and some bottom feeder algae eaters. Dr. Nick, what do you got for Timothy?
Well, that's a great tank to start. 65 gallons is a really good size. You should be very successful with it. We always say that, you know, the larger the tank, the better, because the water will be more stable. And especially if you're new at aquarium keeping, bigger tanks are easier. They're more expensive to get started with, but they're easier to maintain. Smaller tanks just require a lot more care and are a little more sensitive to tweaks in the water quality, so you can end up with problems with your fish more easily. So a 65-gallon tank is a great tank. You can have lots of fish in there, so it'll really be an impressive looking tank. So what type of fish and what type of tanks? You're not using CO2, so you can use really most common plants that are less sensitive to lighting and CO2 requirements. And a couple of good ones for these would be in the back of the tank, where you'd have like a wall on the back of plants, maybe some rock work and some resin type logs, things like that for decoration. But the back and the sides, you could have taller plants. You can start with some of the sword plants, some Vallisneria, Sagittaria, things that will be growing taller. And the 65-gallon tank's pretty high, so that'll give you room for some of the bigger plants. Another one I like is Anubias. It grows very slowly, so you can start with some smaller ones that will eventually get big. I have some Anubias in my tank that are from 2009, so that's like 12, 13 years old. And, you know, they started out as little plants, and over the years they've gotten taller and taller. They're also kind of bushy, and they have roots that come down from the whole stem all the way down. So if you, at any point, you can break parts off and replant them. And if it gets too big for your tank, you can break part of it off and replant it next to it. But the Anubias I have now are tall enough that they reach the top of my 55-gallon tank. And all of the Anubias in my tank have been broken off of the original plant that I had and spread around. So that's a really great plant for really any size aquarium, because you can always break it off. In the front of the aquarium, you can have some shorter plants that don't grow as high, that will still be like ground cover type, and there's a lot of different ones there. You can get some of the Anubias nana petite, which is a very small type of Anubias, the dwarf hairgrass, and dwarf Sagittarius subulata. Those are some that you can put at the front of the tank that will still give you some plants there, but don't get so high that it will interfere with your fish. In the middle of the tank, you want a nice open area for the fish to swim, especially you mentioned schooling fish like neon tetras. Those are great fish. And if you get a school of 10 or 20 neon tetras in that big of a tank, it will look fabulous swimming around there. And then you can add other types of fish as well. So what I would recommend, because you want a lot of plants, is probably not any cichlids. Cichlids are great at uprooting plants and disturbing the gravel and rearranging your tank. African cichlids require all that rock work to hide in. South American cichlids are more substrate spawners and will like to dig up the roots of plants and things. So really, cichlids are probably not the great addition to that. And a couple exceptions might be some angelfish or some dwarf rams, really small cichlids like that. But in general, I would say go with some gouramis. Pearl gouramis, beautiful fish. Blue gouramis, they get big, but they're pretty docile, so they'll be okay with your neon tetras. So there's a number of different gourami varieties. Dwarf gouramis stay small, but are very colorful. Don't get giant gouramis, or even kissing gouramis are probably not so good, but any of the colorful gouramis would be great. Live bearers, particularly swordtails. Swordtails can get really, really big compared to other live bearers like guppies, platies, and mollies. Swordtails look great in there. There's a lot of color varieties, the reds and the common greens, and there's more color varieties available, pineapple swords. The nice thing about live bearers is I have a colony of live bearers. I have some Endler's live bearers that I've had since 2003. And of course, the original ones have long passed away, but they've had generations of babies, and I still have, 20 years later, I still have a colony of Endlers. I have other live bearers, swordtails, and mollies going back over 10 years in a colony. So these are fish that reproduce pretty readily. And if you have a lot of plants in your tank, the babies will hide. So you will get multiple generations going to where you may never have to buy more of the live bearers. But they're friendly. They get along with smaller fish. And those will be good. Some other ones might be zebra danios, or other types of danios would look good in there. They're also schooling fish. A lot of the barbs. Be careful about tiger barbs. They can sometimes be fin nippers, but usually if you get 5 or 6 of them in a group, they kind of hang together and they're less aggressive. But danios, barbs, any of the live bearers, other tetras. There's a lot of other colorful tetras besides the neon tetra that would be good. So if you have a couple schools of different type of fish swimming around, plus some bigger fish like some bigger gouramis or swordtails or a giant danio, things like that are a little bit bigger but are non-aggressive and won't bother your little fish, and they won't bother the plants. That would be a pretty good mix. Now, how many can you put in? Well, the general rule of thumb that they've used in the aquarium industry for years is an inch of full-size fish per gallon of water. So in a 60-gallon tank, you could have 6 10-inch fish, which would probably be okay, or 61-inch fish. Now, a lot of that depends on the mix of the fish and the filtration system you have. So it's important that you do have a good filtration system. On that large of aquarium, I would recommend a canister filter, a big canister filter, and they work really well. They're easy to maintain. About once a month, you have to take them out and rinse them out the media, put them back together, do your water changes every 2 to 4 weeks, and you should be pretty good. But when you add the fish, you need to add them over a period of time. Don't put them in all at once, because what will happen is when you first set up an aquarium, we've talked about the biofiltration and ammonia, nitrite, nitrate cycle. When you first set up the tank, there's no biofiltration going. It requires live bacteria. So you put in just a few fish, maybe 6 zebra danios or some hardy fish like that. The ammonia will start increasing, then the nitrite, and eventually nitrate. If you do your weekly water testing, and if there's no problem with ammonia or nitrite, add a few more fish. The next week, do the same. And over a period of 6 or 8 weeks, you can add the fish gradually and testing the water, doing water changes as needed. You can add ammonia neutralizer if you start seeing ammonia buildup. You can add bacteria starter to get your bacteria growing faster. It's not instant, even though it'll tell you instantly add fish. The bacteria starter doesn't instantly put bacteria in your tank, but it'll help generate the bacteria faster. And normally it takes about 3 to 4 weeks. You add the bacteria starter, maybe it's only 1 week. So that's definitely a benefit. If you don't add bacteria starter, it's okay. You need to add the fish more slowly because it's going to take longer for the bacteria to develop. These are the beneficial bacteria that live in the filter media that break down ammonia, which is toxic, to nitrite, which is toxic, to nitrate, which is less toxic. And so the nitrate can get higher, and you remove that with water changes. The good thing about having plants, sorry if I keep going on here, but the good thing about having the plants in the aquarium is the plants absorb nitrate. So that will actually help reduce the nitrate and the phosphate in the water, which are bad things that will promote algae. So you get rid of those by doing water changes, but the plants will help. So add your fish slowly over time. Make sure you have good filtration. Make sure you get your bacteria growing in your filter by monitoring your ammonia, nitrite, and nitrate. Put in as much plants as you have room for, and it looks good for you. And the last part of this question is about algae eaters and bottom feeders. And I definitely recommend those in your tank as well. My favorite are Corydoras catfish. There's a lot of different color varieties available. They are so cute. They only get about 1 inch to 2 inches long. The females are bigger than the males. They will probably breed in your aquarium if you have lots of plants. And they lay eggs on solid surface, and the babies just are free swimming. So unless you have stuff that's eating babies, you may even get babies. But albino Corydoras are great. Green Corydoras, which is the non-albino version of what you'll find is albino. Bronze Corydoras, spotted Corydoras. There's 100 different spotted Corydoras available. But these are really great fish. They swim around the bottom. They're really cute, and they'll eat any leftover food. You do have to make sure you actually feed them, because if you have a lot of fish in your tank, the food may never get to the bottom, and your cories never get any food. So I use with my cories, I have a sinking pellets that I use in addition to flake food. So I put the flake food, the top feeders eat that, the bottom feeders eat the sinking pellets, and then the top feeders go down to the bottom and finish off any sinking pellets that are left. As far as plecos, great. They're good algae eaters. Corydoras will not eat algae off your aquarium glass. So if you're thinking you're having an algae problem, you definitely want to get a pleco. Now, what do you get? Well, in a 65-gallon aquarium, you could get the sailfin pleco or the common pleco, the one you see at the pet shops for like $6.99. But that fish that you buy gets to be that big, right? It's 18 inches, 20 inches long. So you have a 10-gallon aquarium. Don't buy the cheap pleco because it gets way too big. A 65-gallon aquarium would be okay. The problem, though, is those plecos are like bulldozers, and they will mess up your plants. So probably if you want a planted aquarium, don't get a common pleco or a sailfin pleco. You want to get a smaller species of pleco like the bristlenose, which I love and I have in my tank, or a rubber lip. Those will only get about 4 or 5 inches long, and they're not as bad on the plants. They will eat algae. They'll stick on the glass. So probably a rubber lip or an albino rubber lip or albino bristlenose or regular bristlenose. Those would be good. And they don't get too big. They won't mess up your plants. They do want a place to hide. So you want to make sure. Mine, I have a big artificial hollow log tree, and it sleeps in there all day long. I can see his little head poking out a hole, and then at night, as soon as the lights go out, he comes out and he swims around the tank and eats the algae and does whatever he does it. And then when the light goes back on, he goes in the hole. So you may not see him a lot, but I know he's there, and they're great to have. Boy, what else? Did that pretty much cover it?
I think you covered it. Yeah, done.
Yeah.
I think Timothy's got and anybody else interested in setting up a planted freshwater aquarium, I think you pretty much just hit the nail on the head with that one. So nicely done.
Okay.
I'm assuming there's nothing you would like to add.
I mean, I could add a couple of things. I could always add a couple of things. I mean,
Yeah, go ahead, Patrick.
Dr. Nick threw out the canister filters. I mean, if you're going to have a planted tank, you should always use a canister filter. I mean, in my opinion, because it's a closed system, there's no, I mean, you can, like the water that comes back into the tank, you can position that so it's below the surface of the water so that the surface is nice and still. Because any CO2 that the fish, you know, put into the tank, you want to keep that into the tank. If you have a power filter or something there's a lot of surface agitation, that's going to force the CO2 out that much faster. So if you have a closed system like a canister filter that's completely enclosed, like there's no agitation or anything like that, all the CO2 that the fish produce, the plants can use it as a carbon source and put it into new growth. So if you're going to do a planted tank and you're not going to do a CO2 system, then you should definitely do a canister filter.
Yes, and I'm going to add about that. The CO2, if you're really doing a heavily planted tank and you really are promoting the plants, using CO2 is okay. I don't use CO2 in my tank and my plants do great. I just have ordinary aquarium lighting, LED lighting, but nothing special for plants. And so my plants are doing fine without CO2 and with just ordinary LED lighting.
So what's your, with your tank, Dr. do you use any plant supplements, or do you find that just kind of the all natural way to go is working just fine for you? Or do you have any thoughts on the plant supplements? Like I think from Seachem comes to mind. They have a lot of great options there.
Yeah, and those are, you can actually get what they call liquid CO2, which is a carbon source that instead of having a CO2 gas, you can add that. I've added it over time. In the past, I've used the lateralite in the bottom substrate of the gravel, but right now I actually just replaced the gravel in my aquarium this year. I went from natural looking to black, give it a new look, and it's just regular black aquarium gravel, no substrates in it. And my nitrate maybe runs a little bit higher because I tend not to do water changes more frequently than once a month. So you'll see the nitrate going up, but I really at this point haven't added a lot of supplements. In the past I have, but currently I'm not, and the plants seem to be doing pretty well.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, that was really great. Thank you both. Next question comes from an Eric. Is it better to use Kalkwasser in two-part, or should I choose only one or the other? Any recommendations on what is best in order to have SPS corals? Patrick.
So Kalkwasser. Kalkwasser, it's a German word for calcium hydroxide. So what it is you're adding this powder to water and you're making it a very alkaline solution, and that alkaline solution you add to your tank to help replace the calcium that the coral removes from the water. So by doing that, you're also increasing the pH and increasing the alkalinity as well, which is a tried and true method. I mean, it's been around probably since the beginning of reef keeping. I mean, it's pretty, I want to say goof proof, but it's not. And it's also very, cost effective. It's not very expensive to do. But the problem is because this Kalkwasser mix is an alkaline solution, and it measures in around like 12 on the pH scale, if not higher. So when you're adding that to your tank, you got to be very careful, because you can, your pH especially can swing, and that will shock your animals in your tank. So you got to make sure that you follow the recommended dose, and you want to start off very, very slow and add it very, very slow. So there's a lot that can go wrong, for sure. And it also does have limits on a tank that does have a lot of coral growing in it. So there's also what's called the two-part system, which is you have a calcium additive and then an alkaline additive too. So by adding the two-part system, you use a doser, which you can control and you can tweak over time. So continue to check your calcium level, check your alkalinity level, and you can adjust your doser. It's a lot safer of a method until you find that sweet spot. So in a tank that's got acros and SPS corals and stuff like that, I would definitely recommend doing the two-part system. It's a lot safer. Like I said, a lot of hobbyists do Kalkwasser, but it is, there are limitations to it, especially if you have a bigger system. Kalkwasser is really good if you're using a calcium reactor. So if you have a calcium reactor, you're actually injecting CO2 into the water and lowering the pH in the reactor so that calcium dissolves quicker and then is re-released back into the water. So that by lowering the pH of that water that's going into the system is lower. So that could affect the pH in your system. So using Kalkwasser as like a two-part to that system, that works really well because that'll help buffer the water back up. But for most hobbyists that are just starting out, or they have a good size tank that's got a lot of coral and stuff, I would recommend the two-part system. It's a lot easier to fine tune it using a dosing system.
Awesome. All right. Moving along then, next up on the list. We got a question from Brandon here. Brandon's quite curious about, is a UV light worth the money, and how does it help with tank health? Patrick, I'm going to give this one a little pitch to you as well.
Okay. So UV light, I know we've talked about this in the past. I think UV lights are great on aquariums. They're really, really important on ponds. Like, I mean, I don't think you can have a pond without a UV light. I'm sure Dr. Nick would agree with that one for sure. Just because of free-floating algae, it kills the spores. But in an actual tank, anything, a little backstory on UV lights too. You got to make sure that the water is going through there nice and slow too. A lot of people just kind of crank the water through there, and if the water does not have enough exposure to that UV bulb, then it's not doing anything. It's just wasting electricity. And at the same time too, the quartz sleeve that the UV light lives in, more or less, you got to make sure that stays nice and clean too, because if there's a film or any type of deposits that start to accumulate on that too, the light can't pass through that, and it can't kill any pathogens that are in the water. So basically anything that's free swimming, the UV light can kill. A lot of life cycles of like ick, for instance, and stuff like that are free swimming. So having a UV light is important in quarantine systems. I mean, it is important on your main system as well. But when you're quarantining animals, it's good to have some form of sterilization on there. That's about it, to be honest with you. I'm sure Dr. Nick has a few points to touch on that as well.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned about the flow rate is probably the most critical thing. So UV light, when you're standing out in the sun, you're exposed to UVA and UVB, which are longer wavelengths of UV light. And that's what gives you a suntan. It'll also give you a sunburn. It also helps your body produce vitamin D3, which is important. So there's some definite benefits. Reptiles require UVA and UVB for their calcium metabolism. And so that's why we use UV lights on reptiles. But the UV light we're talking about for aquariums is different. So don't get a reptile light bulb. That's UVA and UVB. The UV light we use on aquariums is UVC. That will kill you. So you have to make sure you use it very carefully. You do not want the UV bulb exposed showing light. So that's why it comes in a tube. You want to make sure that it comes in a tube. You put the sleeve in there. You put the UV light bulb in there, and usually there'll be like, sometimes it's a glass marble or something that will indicate that the UV light is on, but you do not want to be exposed directly to that UVC light. It's a very low wavelength that disrupts the genetic material of organisms that are exposed to it. So you're basically breaking down the DNA and RNA of bacteria, viruses, fungus, protozoa, algae, whatever it is that's being exposed to. Hospitals use UVC light inside of air ducts, so that as the air filters through a hospital, it'll go through a UV light, and the dust particles and things that might have viruses or bacteria on them get exposed to UV, and it's killed, so that the air blowing into your hospital room is purified. There are some water filtration systems that use UVC to kill microorganisms in the water for drinking water. So when we're talking about the ponds, we're talking about a UV bulb that's encased in a plastic sleeve, usually, sometimes metal, but the water flows through the tube, and the UV light has to expose to the microorganism for a certain period of time. And it's measured in microwatts per second, or microwatt seconds per centimeter squared. That's the unit that's used. And so you have to look at the centimeters that the UV bulb is exposed to, times the microwatts, which is the power rating of the bulb, times the seconds that the bulb is shining. Sorry, I knocked my water over. The seconds that it's exposed to. So the faster it flows through, the shorter time it's exposed, the less effective it is. So most people will want to buy UV lights that are rated for bigger tank than you have, so that the flow rate will be slower, going through a bigger volume of UV for better effect. Then the last point I want to bring up is that the bulb itself has a limited life. Usually a year. Some manufacturers will say 14 months, year and a half. Some might only say 8 months. You have to pay attention to what the manufacturer tells you is the life expectancy of the bulb, because the bulb will still produce visible light even though it no longer produces UVC light. And so you might have a light lit up, but it's no longer killing the microorganisms. So you need to change it as appropriate. One way you could tell on an outdoor pond that Patrick mentioned, they're great for killing free-floating algae that causes green water. So if your water is perfectly clear, and then after 8-10 months, your water starts getting green, you know it's time to change the UV light bulb. But in a home aquarium, you should probably change it once a year, or monitor your whatever the package tells you.
Awesome. Yep. So thank you both. We are just about at time here, but I want to get one more question in because we actually got a couple from the chat. So I'm going to take it from Peter. He's curious, is ozone a good addition to a protein skimmer to raise ORP? I'll leave that to you, Patrick.
So ozone, yeah. Adding ozone to your tank is great for water purification for sure, because it can help break down ammonia, nitrate, stuff like that by adding ozone. You do want to make sure that it's vented to outside, because ozone is toxic. That's another problem. So I don't know if you have that ability to do that. But generally, is ozone a good addition to yeah, so yeah, I mean, adding the ozone will raise the ORP. Sorry, I'm just having trouble understanding the question. Yeah, and usually, yeah, you add it to the protein skimmer. Yeah, yes. The only thing I can think of is, yeah, it's just you got to be careful with ozone. You want to make sure that it's vented outside. So on your collection cup, you want to make sure that that's sealed and it's has a tube or something going out the window or something like that, because you don't want your house smelling like a swimming pool, because it will. Sure.
All right. Well, last word to you, Dr. Nick, if you have anything you'd like to add to that. Otherwise, we can wrap it up.
Yeah, so ozone is also toxic to the fish. So when you're using ozone, you don't want it to stay in the water and go into the aquarium. So typically when it's used, ozone, as Patrick mentioned, it's used in a skimmer. So it's the actual gas that's going up in the skimmer and is gassed off at the top. But you want to vent that. If you can smell it, you probably have too much ozone available. If you don't know what ozone smells like, it's when you go outside after a lightning storm. That smell is ozone. If you take an electric light switch and turn it on and off real fast, it'll cause little sparks in there, which create ozone, and you'll smell ozone from your light switch. So that's how you can learn what ozone smells like. But if you can smell it, it's too much. So you want to vent it out. You want to make sure you get rid of the ozone before it goes into the filter. So if you're using ozone, or into the aquarium. So if you're using ozone in your filter, the last step should be a UV light. And as the water goes through the UV light, UV also breaks down ozone into oxygen, and it'll get rid of the ozone before it goes into your tank.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that wraps up this week's live Q&A. Just as a reminder, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, we were doing these every week, but we're going to change it to every other week. So our next live Q&A will be Wednesday, August 24th. Almost in April. I don't know what month they are. I can't believe it's already August, guys. Like, what the heck? Where'd the year go? So August 24th. And I think we got some cool ideas we're going to try to do. Dr. Nick, you and I were talking about this. You guys are both going to Super Zoo. So I think that's going to be a really cool opportunity in Las Vegas. So I think we'll definitely look at doing that. You guys will be there in Las Vegas. I'll be here in Wisconsin. So you guys will have to party without me. But look forward to that. Again, next live Q&A is going to be August 24th. We're going to be taking some behind the scenes at Super. So definitely stay on the lookout for that. I think it's going to be a really fun one. So Samuel, I saw you had a question. Don't worry, we're going to put that in our list, and we're going to make sure we get to answering that. But first and foremost, thank you, Dr. Nick. Thank you, Patrick, for taking time on answering questions today. And thank you most of all to the viewers, and thank you for joining us today. As always, we welcome your questions, and we look forward to hanging out with you guys again in the future. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.
See you in 2 weeks.
Yep.